Hi, I'm Bob with LPS Computer. Today we're going to replace the electronics module in Designjet 800. The procedure is also the same for the 500 and the 510, although the parts are slightly different. So if you're getting an error code, I'm sorry, I'm just a little upset right now. I read an article on Fox News online this morning about a 70-year-old man who drove his car into a crowd of people and injured some folks. Fortunately, no one was killed. But at the bottom, in the comments section, some swastika-faced Nazi, wet behind the ears punk communist, racist, herbophobe Nazi had the nerve to say that he thought that people, when they turned 70, should have to take the driver's test again. Well, I just turned 70 a little while ago, and I take exception with that. I've been driving for 65 years, and in all that time, I have very rarely driven my car into crowds of people. So if you happen to agree with this punk, all I can say is if you don't like the way I drive, then stay off the sidewalk. I feel much better now. Thank you. Okay. This is one quick story. Since we're talking about driving, I live about 30 miles north of San Diego, about 100 miles south of Los Angeles. Last week, I had to go to Los Angeles on business, so I drove up Interstate 5 in the morning, picked my way through all of that traffic, made my appointment, had lunch, and was heading back south on the freeway. My wife called, and I answered the phone. She said she was calling because she was watching the news and she wanted to warn me there was a wrong-way driver on I-5. So I told her, one, there's hundreds of them. I'll tell you, it's a miracle I got home safe that day. These California drivers are just plain dangerous. Okay, no more sad stories. Where was I? Why would you want to change the electronics module? Well, if you get an error code on your 500 or 800, that's an 01:10, that's almost a for sure sign that your electronics module has died. There are some other error codes, 0111, which means that the fan has stopped working and you may want to try to replace the fan or the whole emod. 0112, which means that the EEPROM, the programming part of this thing, is fouled up in some way, or an 0113, which just means that you have a hardware malfunction in the emod. So any of those error codes would indicate you probably want to change out the electronics module. Other things could be if you're getting geometries printing on your images that aren't supposed to be there. That's usually defective memory in the emod. There's 16 megabytes of memory in here. If it goes bad, there's not much you can do with it. It's not discrete. It's part of the board. You'd have to change out the whole thing. If the machine refuses to boot, it's probably going to be the power supply, but it could also be the emod. So if you have a green light indicating you have 5 volts but nothing else, it's probably the emod. Error code 7904. That's a big, mysterious, spooky error code. That's a firmware error. Now that could come from your computer because for instance, maybe you updated the Windows to Windows 10 or something, but you didn't update the driver. So now the driver is no longer compatible, and it's sending stuff to the printer that the printer doesn't understand. That's one possibility, or you could just have a corrupt printer driver. You could have a bad file. Some PDFs, after they've been emailed all around, get corrupt, and when you send it to the printer, it doesn't know what to do with it. If you're sending an image file, something like from Photoshop, and you've got multiple layers and you haven't flattened it, the machine really gets confused on multiple layers. You have to flatten the image before you send it to the printer, and then it can rasterize it properly and print it. So those are some reasons the computer would cause a 7904. When you do experience that, you'd want to disconnect the printer from the computer and run a print head alignment or something. Make the printer print, make it work. And if you still get the 7904, then you know it's not on the computer side, it's on the printer side. The things that will cause 7904 in a printer, many times I've seen third-party ink cartridges do it. They have a smart chip on it, and I guess they're not that smart, and they cause problems. A defective chip on a print head will also do that. Those are the primary reasons. The way to troubleshoot something like that would be to take all the ink out, take all the print heads out, cycle the power on the printer, and when it comes back up and asks for ink, put one in. If it accepts it, great. Take it back out, go to the next one. See if you can find one that the printer does not like, and then replace that. And after the ink is in, you can do the same thing with the print heads. Sometimes one print head will cause all the print heads to show bad. The reason being, they share some signals. So if one of them is fouled up, it can drag them all down. It can even make its neighbor look bad without showing itself. But you can usually pick them out by putting them in the machine one at a time, taking them back out and going to the next one. If you do all of that and you still have the 7904, then it probably is the electronics module, and that would be the last thing you'd want to check. Well, there's no way to check it. All you can do is replace it and see if that fixes the problem. It usually does. There's firmware read-only memory on this, and firmware is really software that's permanently written onto a read-only memory. And if that becomes corrupt, that's the program that runs the machine. And if it's issuing instructions or interpreting instructions in a way that don't make any sense to the machine, it'll put up that error. So there's not much you can do with that other than replace the electronics module. This is the electronics module. It lives on this side of the machine. It houses the Jet Direct card, which is the Ethernet card. And there's a slot here on the 800s, and on the 510s there will be a formatter card. There's a formatter card in this, and I will show you that when we take it out. So the first thing we want to do is, well, let me turn the machine around here. Okay, we're going to have to take this cover off. There's 5 screws on this cover. I'll unplug it. One of the screws is inside the front cover here. There's one down on the bottom in the front. If you bend over, you look at it, you'll see it. And there are 3 in the back. There's 1, 2, 3. Now, we've already removed all of these screws, except for one, just to speed things along here a little bit. This is the cover that covers the electronics module. You press in on this relief here, this arrow, that unlatches it, and then you can hinge it out and take that cover off. Okay, once that's off, you remove the 3 screws in the back. And we'll slide that cover off. Okay, this is the electronics module. This is the formatter for the 800. In the 500, this will not be present. And this is a Jet Direct card. When you order these from us, they come without these 2 items. They're separate parts. So the first thing I'm going to do is take these out. I'm going to put these in a new electronics module after we put them in. Now the first thing we have to do is get all of the wires and connectors off of the electronics module. Let me get that other one a second. you can see there's quite a few connectors here. This big one is to the power supply. These are all keyed. You cannot get these in incorrectly. They're either keyed by their shape or their color. So the yellow connector goes in here, white in here. The rest of them have different shapes. It's not possible to get them in wrong with the exception of the trailing cable connector. Now let me show you about the trailing cable connector. This is called a ZIF, Zero Insertion Force Connector. And it's got little clamps on it. And you lift those up. These are wedge shaped down inside, so when you put the cable in, it takes no force at all. You put it in and you just feel for when it's squared up, and then you lock them back down. And you do the same thing with the other cable, the other side of the trailing cable. So that's what we're going to be disconnecting here on the cables that are in the printer. I usually start with the power supply connector, simply because that's kind of a two-handed job. You have to unclip it here and then work it out. There's the yellow one, white motor connectors, and these couple of little ones here, data connector. Now, I'm not going to just pull the trailing cables on, I'm going to unlatch them first. And you'll see they slide right out. That bottom was not totally dislocated. There it is. So I'll leave them unlatched until we put the new one in. So it's ready to come out. Now there's only 3 screws mounting the electronics module. One is on top, right here. I'll take that out. Oops, I gotta go to a T10. Now there's 2 screws down here. There's one on the back side right there. And we have one more down underneath, and that one happens to be missing. Normally there's a screw in there. So this thing is loose now on the frame. I'm going to go back to the other emod here. You see there's a, where is it? This tab actually fits into the frame, so it's not coming out. You have to lift it up to get it past that tab, and then you can lift it out. So I'm going to fit the new one. Oh, here's the hook. There's a hook right here that goes into that slot. I had my thinking backwards there. That goes on there. So we can put it on, slide it on like that. Now normally, there's not much room in here to get these trailing cables in. So I'll put the other cables on first, and then I'll unhook it again and bring it back out to give myself a little more room to put all the cables back on. So we'll get these trailing cables up out of the way. Kind of going in reverse order from the way I took them off. These wires are stiff enough to hold the weight of this when I unhook it. So now I'm going to unhook it again and bring this out just a little bit, just so I've got room to put these trailing cables on. So I want to make sure these clamps are loose. See, it fits in there, and I'm using no force at all. It just slips right in. And you clamp them down. Now it's quite solid. Same thing on this one. Make sure they're in all the way. And that's all there is to that. Now we put this back on the hook. And it's back on. And we put the 3 screws back in. And that's pretty much what's involved in the physical replacement. Now there's one more step to this, and it's a very important step. And you can blow the whole job by getting it wrong. And that is when you power it up, it's going to ask you what was replaced. The reason it asks that is because when the machine is first turned on, the electronics module sends a message out to the ink supply station over on the other side of the machine. And it's comparing the serial number, model number, and the settings with a read-only memory that's stored in the ink supply station to make sure nothing has changed and everybody agrees with everybody. When we first turn this on, it's going to ask that, and it's going to find out that the serial number doesn't match, the settings don't match, and it's going to know something has changed. It's going to ask what happened. So it will give you 2 choices. It will ask if the main logic board was replaced or the ink supply station was replaced. Be sure you say it was the main logic board, because then what it's going to do is take all the information from the ink supply station ROM and move that, overwrite everything on the electronics module ROM and make everything right. If you do it in reverse order, whatever spurious information here is going to go the other direction, and this machine is not going to work. It won't boot. It won't do much of anything. It'll be very confused. So make sure you answer that question correctly. We're going to power it up here and do that just to make sure it's clear how that is done. I'm going to put the formatter back in. And turn this around. Put a little AC on it here. And as we say in the trade, see if it smokes. Okay, it's starting up. So this will start its boot sequence, but it's not going to recognize that electronics module. Okay, it says EEROM discrepancy. That means it knows that whatever's in the ink supply station EEROM doesn't match what's in the electronics module. So we replaced the main logic board. The other option is ISS replace. Some people start pushing buttons and they say that, and then I get a phone call and I have to try to talk them all the way through the process of undoing that, which is not easily done. So make sure you put that in there correct. So you're going to hit the enter button. So that's all there is to that. Of course, you have to put the right cover back on, left cover. And anyway, if you're driving in California, be very careful. Like I said, these people are pretty dangerous out here. So have a good day, and I'll see you next time. There seems to be a little confusion out there that where people think because there's one part number in the service manual, there's only one kind of emod. And in one respect, that is true. They're all the same part except for the 510, which is physically different. They look the same, it mounts the same, but electronically it's a little different. For the 500s and 800s, they are in fact configured differently. They're programmed differently, even though they're the same part. And it can be a real challenge, maybe even impossible, to get one to work if it's not pre-configured. The electronics modules, LPS cells, are pre-configured. When you go to our website and you want to order an electronics module, we have a drop-down window with several options. It'll be 500, 24-inch or 42-inch, 800, 42-inch or 24-inch, and I believe there's a postscript 800 also. So when you order that, we do all the legwork here. We configure that for the correct machine based on the order, and that's what we ship out. And we have a good supply of these. I believe we have them on sale for $127, something like that. And it's pretty much plug and play. It's not a very difficult replacement, certainly much easier than putting in a belt. That's about all I've got for you for today. So, as always, we're available by phone for questions or to make a phone order or whatever you need at 800-959-1575. And y'all have a nice day. We'll see you next time.